later on in the show. Quite the discussion on this topic tonight. I am joined by Daryl Johnson. He is a former Senior Analyst for Domestic Terrorism at the Department of Homeland Security and author of Wing Resurgence. Also with us tonight, Richard Cohen, President of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And also on board tonight is Dr. James Peterson, Director of Africana Studies and Associate Professor of English at Lehigh University. Gentlemen, great to have you with us tonight. Mr. Cohen, you first. What kind of reaction have you received from this report now that it's been out by your organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern, of course, about the numbers that we were talking about, the increase in the number of these conspiracy-minded anti-government groups, the increase in the number of right-wing plots, a lot of talk about it, a lot of concern. But we haven't yet heard from Secretary Napolitano or General Holder. And I think it's really, really very important for them to take this seriously and to increase the number of resources that they're devoting to this growing problem.
So you see a real parallel before Oklahoma City and right now, moving up as far as the rhetoric, the number of groups, and the activity that's out there.
Absolutely, Ed. And, you know, 6 months before the Oklahoma City bombing, we sent a letter to Attorney General Reno saying that we were really very, very concerned. And, you know, we feel that same kind of concern now. And I want to point out one thing. You know, you gave the number, almost 1,400 of these anti-government groups. Those figures were collected before the Newtown massacre and before all of this right-wing craziness over, you know, proposed gun control laws now. And so I think that we're likely to see a further spike in these numbers.
Sure. Mr. Johnson, you wrote the 2009 analysis for the Department of Homeland Security about right-wing extremism. It was heavily criticized by conservatives everywhere. You were repudiated by the DHS under pressure and left the agency. Has that experience colored your opinion at all when you hear reports like this come out?
Well, what's colored my opinion is the fact that the Department of Homeland Security has not changed since I left. Despite this huge spike in the number of anti-government groups, they still only have one analyst looking at domestic non-Islamic extremism. I find that just quite startling and unsettling to me.
What should be done about it?
Well, I think the SPLC has taken an important step in recommending an interagency task force, but there's other things that can be done. We have a whole generation of analysts and law enforcement officers who've just been coming up through the ranks that have no idea of what they're dealing with because they weren't on the job back in the 1990s. So I'd encourage training. We need to have commitment on the state of federal, state, and local law enforcement to long-term undercover investigations looking into these groups.
Well, Mr. Johnson, how do you know what to take serious and what is a joke? I mean, where do you draw the line? And can analysts actually get to a point where they say, we really need to watch this group, they are going to be trouble?
Yeah, that's one of the difficult aspects of the job. I think one of the things you can look at is the different types of movements we have present here in the United States and look at their histories. Do they have a history of violence? Are they making current calls for violence? Are they making threatening language towards either minority groups or towards government officials? These are types of things that analysts and officers should be looking at.
James Peterson, can we ignore the fact that these groups have increased the intensity under an African-American president?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's an important factor in this whole discussion. We've seen other studies that have tracked the rise of racial animus over the course of Mr. Obama's presidency. And Ed, you've done a lot of work on this show to try to talk about the kind of language that we see coming from the right, sometimes from political leaders around socialism and some of the racialized language. The reason why we want to be cautious and sensible about that kind of language is because it stokes the flames of the sort of radical right-wing groups that are interested in training and preparing for warfare. Now, listen, these groups have the right to do that, but at the end of the day, our government and citizens have to be very, very vigilant about the own extremism that exists in our society.
What would trigger, you think, Mr. Johnson, what would trigger a group to do something?
Well, we're looking at an issue that I hope wasn't going to come to fruition during this next administration. That's the issue of gun control. Yep. This is a very inflammatory issue for these types of groups who've been arming themselves. And actually, they've had conspiracy theories that have perpetuated on the Internet for the past, 4 or 5 years talking about this very fact, that there might be a gun ban. And so when we have these types of events like the Newtown Massacre that brings up these issues, they always had the potential to agitate these groups further.
Yeah, Mr. Cohen, in your letter, you brought up the